Welcome to Reality with Bruce the Taurus. With me is Larry Schnapf, an environmental attorney based in New York City who has been interested in the JFK assassination since it happened when he was in the fifth grade. He did an independent study about it in college. He's written articles on the Warren Commission. He's a longtime member of the Mary Ferrell Foundation, a former member of the Citizens Against Political Assassinations organization. He was chair of the Kappa Legal Committee, and he has lectured on various legal and evidentiary issues concerning the JFK assassination. Thank you very much for joining me tonight, Larry. How are you?
Hi, Bruce. Thanks for inviting me.
I think the timing's really interesting because it is Monday, March 17th, St. Patrick's Day. But before we get into current events, like I just mentioned in your bio, you were in the fifth grade. Tell me that impact, that story when it happened, please.
So I was my fifth grade class had just been discharged at the end of the day. It was 2:30 our time, and I'm coming into the hallway to go out to school, and my neighbor Andy Eisenberg comes up to me, says the president's been shot, and with the governor of Texas, and the only assassination I had known about at that time in my life, I was 10 years old, was Lincoln's assassination. So the first thought that came into my head was Kennedy and the governor of Texas are sitting next to each other in front of a desk in the governor's office, and some guy comes up behind him and shoots him in the back of the head.
Right.
So um, I heard that news, and the next thing I want to do was there was this girl in my class I had a crush on, and so I ran out, ran through the crowded corridor of my school, outside, and I saw her and the girl she's walking with, and I ran up to them and I said, "The president's been shot," and she said to me, "Oh, that's just a rumor. That doesn't happen nowadays." I said, "Okay," so we walked home together, and then when we got to I lived at a T intersection, and as we got to the intersection, my mother was in a car. She pulls up and rolls the window down. She was on the passenger side. And I looked at her. I said, "Is it true the president's been shot?" She goes, "Yes." I said, "Is he okay?" She goes, "No, he died." So we go into the house, and then I had a call from one of my friends. We had this little war club. We used to play in the creek about 3 blocks from my house. My friend tells me, remember, this is 2:30. It's an hour after the shooting. And this is 1963 when no one is really doing jet travel, right? It's all airplanes, propellers.
Mhm.
And my friend tells me that the assassin is in New Jersey. And in fact, he's heading towards our town. And so my friend and another guy, we get our Boy Scout knives and we get some rope and we go down to the creek and we hide. We had these little forts that we created. So we were hiding in our fort, waiting for this guy with a high-powered rifle to come by, and we were going to capture him with our Boy Scout knives and our rope. And we're waiting there for hours, and finally it's starting to get dark. And we know that, we have to go home or else our parents are going to be upset with us. So we kind of just like hang our heads down. We're so disappointed that we didn't get a chance to capture the assassin, and we go home. And then I was playing touch football on Sunday when someone comes running out of the house and says, "They just shot Oswald." So that was my weekend. I remember the day of the funeral. The thing that I remember most is at noon, everything stopped. The traffic stopped in New York. Um, Everything just ground to a halt. It's just for that moment. And I obviously was living in New York, but they showed scenes of that. But the traffic was stopped. Everybody just stopped for like a minute to observe in honor of the president, which was
Wow.
like national. And this is the first time, like this is when TV came of age. We were
Yeah.
all experiencing this for the first time. So that
Yeah.
was an amazing experience. And then um, I was always suspicious because of Oswald's murder. And then when I was in eighth grade, we were doing split sessions. So I would have the 12 to 5 session. That let me go to bed late at night. And that's when I discovered Joe Pine and Alan Burke. Those were late night TV hosts. And they were the original jock shock guys. And they would have people like Mark Lane and other people on talking about the assassination.
TV
And
or
that's
radio? Was that TV or radio?
It was TV.
Okay.
Yeah. Um, and they, that's when I started listening to these guys that were, talking about the assassination. And then I read Mark Lane's book, Rush to Judgment, but the book that really got me was Joshua Thompson's book, 6 Seconds in Dallas.
Yeah.
And I read that book. I took it out of the library and I never returned it. Just like that Seinfeld episode, right?
Right, 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 right. Right.
And in fact, when King Thompson served as an expert, he helped us with the mock trial in 2017. I brought my book with me to Houston so he could sign it.
Nice.
Um, so, so I wrote a little bit and I wrote some book reports on those books. And then in college, I did independent study. I did an independent study course just on the assassination. I did a screenplay, and this shows you how people thought in those days. This is 1975, and my professor tells me first. So first, my first cut of the script, it's President Kennedy, and he says to me, "You can't make it President Kennedy because everyone knows what happened to him. There would be no the action. People would know what the end result was. So there wouldn't be any tension, creative tension in the film.
Right.
So I had to make a different president out of it."
All right.
Uh, so then I graduated from college and I kind of just I pursued a writing career. Then I decided to pursue a legal career. And the one thing I'm frustrated about my life is that I didn't know how to get a job in Washington. And when I discovered that the HSCA was being formed, I had no idea how to apply for a job for them. So I never did. And then by the time the ARB came around, I was deep into my environmental law career and I was at a really pivotal point in it. And if I had, stopped in to go try to get a job at the ARB, it
Hmm.
would have had a really detrimental effect on my career. So I didn't pursue that. I just kind of stayed on the sidelines. And then I got reanimated a little after the 50th anniversary. I had kidney cancer. I got it early, so I was very lucky. And I said, okay, what am I going to do my bonus time?
Hmm.
So I decided to do two things. One was to try to get former Yankee catcher Thurman Munson into the Hall of Fame.
Mm-hmm.
Got him on the ballot, the Old Timers Committee ballot, but he didn't make it. And then I decided to recommit myself to the Kennedy assassination, and I got involved with Kappa. We did a mock trial where we got a hung jury, which was not which was consistent with the prior six of the. There's been seven mock trials
Hmm.
since 1967 that have been held by law schools or bar associations, and six of them have resulted in an acquittal or a hung jury. The only one that resulted in a conviction was a 1986 made-for-TV program with Vincent Bugliosi and Jerry Spence.
Yeah.
And Jerry Spence was kind of doing his courtroom theatrics and wasn't really well versed with the evidence.
Right.
And Vince Bugliosi just, took him to the cleaners. Um, and then Bill Simpich and I did a mock court of inquiry petition. There is a method that could be used right now to try to get Oswald's arrest expunged on grounds of lack of probable cause. And Bill and I actually reached out to Marina Oswald in 2018 to see whether she would be willing to let us do this pro bono. And all she had to do was lend her name to our efforts so we could go into court. It's a discretionary proceeding, and we knew people in the Dallas Democratic Party that could probably get us some judges that were receptive, to listening to this. And she turned us down. I urged her to try to do this because I said you don't want your descendants to be like the Mudd family.
Right.
Dr. Mudd fixed
Right.
John Wilkes Booth's ankle, and he was convicted of conspiracy to kill the president.
Right.
But she was not interested.
Did she give a reason?
They just not interested. I didn't. We couldn't contact her directly. We had to go through an intermediary.
Sure.
They just weren't interested. I mean, in theory, the daughters could authorize it, and maybe we have to wait for Marina to pass away. I don't know. But this would be a real live. We could, actually go into court and try to show that the there was no basis for Oswald's arrest. The law contemplates, the law is really addressed for convictions. It doesn't contemplate that a person would be killed in police custody. But it's certainly the same spirit. And as I said, Bill and I were ready to go with this, and
Wow.
she didn't do that. So then,
Hmm.
and then I started getting involved with Mary Farrell, and then once when President Trump postponed the records, uh, I wasn't established enough in the JFK community to take a leadership role in anything. It took me a couple more years to get, kind of well known enough. And but what I did was I did file a lawsuit against the National Archives to try to get all the records, the correspondence, and the memos involving the postponements by President Trump in 2017 and 2018, the postponements of the JFK records to see what really happened behind the scenes. And
Hmm.
they ended up producing thousands of pages. And I have a story that, was different from what President Trump originally said, and actually kind of gives a good flavor of what really happened. Um, and then when President Biden came into office, I organized a group of lawyers and historians and good government types. First, we sent a letter to President Biden with a legal memo as to trying to explain how President Trump's executive orders did not comply with the law and urging President Biden to release the records, and that fell on deaf ears. And then the next year, um, I tried. My congresswoman was Carolyn Maloney, who was chair of the oversight committee, and I tried to use her. I asked her, and I got a whole bunch of people again to sign a letter requesting that the oversight committee hold oversight hearings on the failure of the executive branch to comply with the JFK Act. But this was now summer of 22, and they were not about to do anything that was going to embarrass President Biden with the upcoming midterm election. They
Gotcha.
did promise me that they would do back channeling to the White House. And when the new archivist was appointed, they said they would talk to her about the JFK Act, but they wouldn't do it'd be on a staff level, would never be in the public hearing. And obviously when President Biden then postponed the records again, that's when, uh, together with Bill Simpich, we convinced Mary Farrell and Gary Aguilar and Tink Thompson to bring a lawsuit against the president and against the National Archives, arguing that the president did not comply with the act and that the National Archives failed to comply with its responsibilities under the act. Um, the we're asking for injunctive relief, which is an order from the judge compelling certain actions. It's very hard to get a court to order a president to do something.
Hmm.
You can get a president to refrain from doing something, but it's very hard to get a president to be ordered to do something. So we were asking the court to rule that the executive orders were invalid under the law, and also the transparency plans were invalid. And the judge just didn't like the case. He was really, kind of fell into the inherent power of the president, and he read the statute in a way which was not consistent with the legislative purpose. The law was designed, it was a remedial statute to fix a problem, and those statutes are supposed to be read very broadly, and he read it very narrowly. So we
Hmm.
then appealed the refusal of the injunction up to the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, and it's very rare again. Normally you have to wait till the case is over before you appeal. You can do what you call interlocutory appeal. We were able to do that, and we were hoping that would be because they were really interested in the case, but they ended up denying the relief. So we were kind of getting ready for the next phase of litigation, and then President Trump issued his executive order when he came back into power.
Okay.
Where we are now.
Well, talk about where we are right now. By the way, thank you for that. And thank you for your dedication to the truth and all your labor. Talk about what your assessment of all that Trump has done since he got into office and his latest announcement today, please.
Okay, so President Trump campaigned that he would release the records. the remaining JFK records. Now, he had told two different stories as to why he had postponed the records during his first term. The first story was what he told Judge Napolitano. Um, I have no reason to not believe what Judge Napolitano shared is not true. I believe what Trump told him is what Judge Napolitano said, is what he
Right.
said.
Right.
So Judge Napolitano asked President Trump, why did you postpone the records? And the president said to him, if you saw what I saw, you'd know why.
Right.
Well, the lawsuit that I filed, the records that I got, showed that he never saw anything. In fact, the National Security Council was tasked with shepherding. So let's take a step back for your listeners and watchers and readers don't that aren't as fully versed. The records of the Warren Commission and the House Select Assassinations Committee had been classified. Now, it turns out the Warren Commission records were improperly classified. There was a committee hearing in 1975 chaired by New York Representative Bella Abzug. And actually, David Bellin, a former Warren Commission staff lawyer, testified to say that the executive order creating the Warren Commission never gave uh, original classification authority to the Warren Commission. You have to be given authority to classify documents. You just don't
Right.
willy-nilly are able to classify records. And in fact, none of the staff actually had security clearances, so they could not actually be reviewing classified records.
Okay.
So, but in any event, the Warren Commission records were improperly classified. There was an attempt uh, to get records out piecemeal, and most of the records that were released by the efforts of researchers like Harold Weisberg
Okay.
using the Freedom of Information Act. In fact, um, the law, when as originally written, had a really big loophole for law enforcement, and the FBI was using that exclusion uh, for not disclosing records. And in 1974, the Freedom of Information Act was amended to tighten up that exclusion, which made it harder for the FBI to deny releasing records. And that was beneficial to Harold Weisberg, and he got a whole bunch of records. The problem with when you get records from the Freedom of Information Act, it only goes to you. So the rest of the world doesn't see it unless it's given to them. But anyway, and he ended up donating his files. So
When they're
that's,
only given to you, are you handcuffed? You can't publicize them?
oh, no, no, no. Like
Okay.
I'm trying to figure out who I'm going to give
All right.
my thousands of pages to.
Right.
I'm talking to a couple of people. I'm trying to figure what's the best way for researchers to review them. Anyway, so so when the JFK movie came out, and so the HSCA also does an investigation, and their records, their congressional records, are classified as well. And under the rules of the House at the time, they would not be released till 2029, 50 years from the time that the committee went out of business.
All right.
So the JFK movie comes out, and by the way, the ARB, when it was doing, it's clear that there was medical testimony that the HSCA got that they did not want to be released, and also it turns out, um, the ARB did some really good work thanks to Doug Horn on getting that information out. But when the Oliver Stone movie came out, what happened then was at the end of the movie, there was this scrolling thing which said that there's, 5 million records and are still secret. And so this Congress got inundated with phone calls and email and letters. And so Congress passed the JFK Records Act, which did two things. Well, first of all, it made a general statement that the records, there should be presumption of disclosure, of prompt disclosure of all JFK records. It indicated that the way that the Freedom of Information Act and the National Security executive order signed by the president had been implemented was preventing disclosure. So that there was a need for a new law.
Hmm.
And this law said, first of all, that the federal government would have to scour its records, scour its files, its offices to look for assassination related records and then transfer them to the National Archives. Second step was it created a records review board, the ARB, Assassination Records Review Board, that would review these records. If an agency wanted to postpone disclosure of the records, they would have to go through a review process that the review board would do. And there were six statutory criteria for when a record could be postponed. It had to be on clear and convincing evidence, which is a criminal level of standard of evidence, very high, means a very high burden to prove.
Hmm.
And they had to show that the disclosure of this information would be would pose imminent harm, I mean identifiable harm to the United States, national security or law enforcement, that is of such gravity that it outweighed the strong public interest in disclosure. So that was what they have to make a finding of. So the FBI was probably the most aggressive agency during the beginning of the ARB era, trying to
Hmm.
postpone records. And the ARB had the power to overrule a postponement request.
And
And if
just to insert chronologically, and you don't have to take it as a tangent because I'm sure, in addition to the FBI being the most aggressive to constrain the Secret Service, I think within 30, 60, 90 days of being requested to turn over their logs from the fall of 63, just destroyed them. I don't think with an explanation or apology or nothing, right? Something like that.
yes, yes. So whereas the FBI went through the procedure of trying to get the president to overrule the ARB, the Secret Service just said, "We don't care. We're going to destroy these travel records, these threat assessment records," and
Thank you.
nobody was punished. And that's when we get at the end of our discussion. That to me is an important reason why young people today, this is the Kennedy assassination. I hope that they'll see is not purely a historic event. It's still influencing our government's policies and actions now. And this transparency is really important to turn our government around and make it more receptive and responsive to the citizens.
Thank you.
So the ARB had 4 years. They did a wonderful job. They did a lot of work, but Congress only funded them for 4 years. And when the ARB went out of business at the end of September of 98, it wasn't because their job was finished, it was because they were not getting any more funding. There were still outstanding search requests that the ARB had tended over to the CIA, for example, and also to the RFK Family Trust. That when President Kennedy was assassinated, Robert Kennedy arranged to have the files in the Oval Office removed, and they've been held by the family trust ever since he died, ever since he was killed. And we don't know what those records have. They're probably related to Cuba and probably some other nefarious stuff that are personal in nature. Um, so when the ARB postponed the records, so the statute says that any records that are postponed would be are to be released by 25 years from the date of the statute, which is October 26, 2017, unless the president certifies again that release of the information would present an identifiable harm to national security or law enforcement that is of such gravity that outweighs the public interest.
Right.
So when the ARB postponed the records, most of them had a 2017 date. Some had 2010, but most of them were 2017. So during the 1998 to 2017, there's very few records that are processed, even though the ARB had all these outstanding search requests, and the National Archives entered into a memorandum of agreement with the CIA and the ARB, where they would supervise the CIA following up on these outstanding search requests. That was never done. Now, in 2000, the National Archives, when they moved so the ARB had set up a definition of assassination records, which, by the way, includes not just records publicly held, not just records held by the government, but also records held by private sources. So the assassination records is not just records, government records, it also can be records that are privately held. So they moved in 2000, the archives said that they were the successor in interest or successor in function to the ARB and moved the ARB's regulations into the regulations that of NARA. And we tried to use that statement in our lawsuit because what does it mean that your successor in function? It means you're continuing the process. And they said they're continuing the process of supplemental collection, which they weren't. So then nothing really happens until 2016. NARA, for a while, in fact, didn't have anyone assigned to the collection to supervise it. And then as the deadline's beginning to approach, in the spring of 2016, actually 2017, NARA sends a letter out to all the agencies that hold equities, or basically the ones that have the records that are interest in the records that have been postponed, and said, we're going to release all the records on October 26, 2017, unless you object. And they then created a guidance document to use for the agencies to help make decisions as to whether the record should be postponed or if they can be disclosed. And the guidance document did not precisely track the statute, which means that it allowed them to use criteria like, for example, effect on present operations, which is not in the statute. So at some point in the Trump administration, the National Security Council was tasked with shepherding this review process. And I say they hijacked it because they controlled the whole process. And
Right.
in the summer of 2017,
Which is the first year of Trump's first administration,
right,
17. Yeah.
right, right. So, and he is new to government, right? And the people that were in the NSC were basically longtime professional staffers. They work for the CIA and the Defense Department and State Department. They're all security people.
Mhm.
And in the summer of 2017, the NARA received requests for postponement from the FBI and the CIA, amongst others. Most of the FBI postponements were related to La Costa Nostra files, mafia files. The CIA, it was a wide assortment. And to their credit, the archivist and the CEO of the archives wrote back and said, your request for postponement are do not comply with the act, and they're not also don't comply with the interpretations of the ARB, and therefore we're not accepting these. Well, the archives went from not accepting the postponements and recommending that they remember the archives doesn't have declassification authority, but they recommended these records not be continued to be classified because, in their opinion, as archivists, it doesn't comply with the act. They actually were forced by the NSC to write a memo to the president requesting postponements. And then an executive order was drafted postponing the records. And when President Trump, on the 2 days before the deadline, goes on Twitter and says, I'm going to release the records in 2 days, there was actually version 12 of an executive order being drafted for him to sign. And apparently Mike Pompeo went into the office. I think he had a spreadsheet. He didn't have the actual documents. He had a spreadsheet maybe, and basically told the president. Now the president later on Tucker Carlson, in mid-January, shortly after he came into office, told Tucker Carlson what the real story was.
This past January.
Right. So it's no longer the if you saw what I saw story. Now it's Mike Pompeo came in. He was director of CIA and said, Mr. President, we can't release this records. There are names there that if the names are released, it could pose a risk to these people. And we made promises to these people back in the 60s that we would never release their names. And if we release their names now, it's going to make it hard for us to get new spies. So President Trump, as he told Tucker Carlson, said, Mike Pompeo's a good guy. The people at the NSC are good guys. They have the best interests of the country. So I went along with this. So, and then in 2018, it was the same drill. It was a 6-month postponement. And then when the 6 month came up, same thing happened. NARA wanted to release them. They were forced to write a memo recommending 3.5 years. And I have an email there was a disagreement over how long to postpone for the second postponement. And I have an email from the CEO of the National Archives to the archivist saying the president's going to have to live with this number, in other words, this postponement date. And nothing happened. Then the records were postponed, and then Biden came along.
Right.
So, um, so Trump, when he issued his executive order on day 3 of his administration
This year.
this year, begins great. He says, "I declare that it's in the public interest for the records to be fully released." He could have at that point said, "I hereby instruct the National Archives to release all the records."
Right.
He did not do that.
No.
He said, "I instruct the Attorney General, the National Security Advisor, um, the Director of National Intelligence to come up with a plan for declassification
Right.
within 15 days. And this plan is to be sent for review to the White House, to the President and the White House counsel, David Warrington." 15 days passed by. We had no evidence of any plan. And time ticked on.
Yeah.
And then, while this is going on, the House decides finally to exercise its oversight authority. It has continuing jurisdiction under the JFK Act to review the compliance with the act. So Chairman Comey appointed Representative Paulina Luna to be the head of the task force on declassification of federal secrets. And unfortunately, its portfolio includes not just JFK Act, but also RFK, MLK, UAPs, Epstein, and COVID.
9/11, I think, too.
Yeah, and so they got a full plate. But
Yeah.
luckily, so she has a press conference, and she basically says she believes there were 2 shooters, that the FBI evidence was inconsistent, and that she wants to go investigation. She wants to interview Warren Commission staffers, and she wants to go to Dealey Plaza.
And the
And I'm saying,
doctors who were at the autopsy.
yeah, and I'm saying to myself, right now the mission should be get these records released. I mean,
Yeah.
you can do an investigation, but you got so much on your plate, and at this point in time,
Yep. Yep.
investigate, right? So. And she was on a steep learning curve. She said a couple of weeks ago that she was surprised that the president couldn't declassify records, that it had to go through a process. Anyway, just last week, I was going on her X platform and saying, "Where's the plan?" It's like, even if the plan was submitted, the American people should see what the plan is. Because the only way we're going to be comfortable that they're not hiding stuff is us to see what the criteria is. So I sent a letter to the White House counsel right before the initial 15-day deadline. And my purpose was to remind him that we're not just talking about the records in the JFK collection. Those are the records that are in the possession of the National Archives. But there are other records that were never given to the National Archives. So, for example, we talked about the Robert F. Kennedy records. We talked, there's the Joanides files that Jeff Morley has been talking about a long time. There's the tape of Carlos Marcello allegedly confessing in jail, that's been sealed in a courthouse in New Orleans, since in the mid-1980s.
Hmm.
And so the point of my letter was to let him know that if the president's executive order to release all the records in the possession of the federal government is to be truly honored, they're going to have to search for these records as well. So we hadn't heard anything, and it was now past 45 days.
Yeah.
And finally today, the president just as he's wont to do, he's at the Kennedy Center, and he decided it's a good time to announce that tomorrow, the 18th, they're going to be dropping 80,000 pages. Now, step back for a moment. On February 10th, the FBI announced that it discovered 2,400 files, which are consisting of approximately 13 to 14,000 pages,
Right.
of records that were never, ever given to the Warren Commission or the HSCA or the ARB and are not in the collection at National Archives. Now, allegedly, they discovered them because they had digitized their records and they did a search and these records turned up. Kind of raises questions about the good faithfulness of the effort they did, in the 60s and 70s and 90s
Yeah.
about looking for records. Um, so we don't know what those records show. I mean, I don't, they claim that they've never been seen before. Does that mean they're not duplicates? I don't know. So that was interesting news.
Mm.
Uh, it would be great if our other agencies did also digitize their records so that they could do a similar search. So supposedly tomorrow we're going to be getting a dump of 80,000 pages of records.
Mm.
And already there was an article in the Post that said somebody in the administration, anonymously said there's nothing new here. There's nothing, revelatory in these documents. I mean, for the FBI, it's mainly names, at least the ones that were in the collection, and they were mainly mafia informants. And you know, we'd like to talk to people. A lot of these people have never been interviewed before. The FBI and the CIA were using 100-year rule before they would release the names. So the statute says that you can hold the names back, you can redact the names only if you make a showing that releasing the name is going to pose an imminent threat to that person. But they don't use, that's not the test they use. There's a bureaucratic test that they use somewhere along the line. Now they use it everywhere. That they can hold a record for 100 years. Until if they can't verify the person's alive, they do it for 100 years. Now that's a problem because that means you can't talk to the people. So, and the biggest regret we have so far is Donald Heath. Donald Heath was a CIA employee, and during the weekend of the assassination, he was tasked to go down to Miami and interview Cubans, both exiles and also pro-Castro sympathizers, to find out if any one of them was involved in the assassination. And there were daily situation reports that were sent back to Washington, and I think from like November to March of 64. And he wrote a memo to the HSCA in May of 77 saying, this is what I did. And I saw these files in this guy McLean's office in 73. And here's the room where he was. And we have no idea if anyone ever looked in that room, if those records exist. Now, some people think that the other reason that he went down there was if there was any of our exiles that were working with us involved, they were going to get removed out of the country so they wouldn't be able to get arrested.
Sure.
So his name is only released after he dies. I think he died in 2019 or 2017, and he's either his name was released in 2019 or 21. I forgot what it was. But we couldn't talk to him about, what this investigation was. The CIA had always denied that they had conducted such an investigation. And we'd like to know where the reports are. They didn't ever look for them. So now sometimes some of the reasons that they postpone the records are really silly bureaucratic reasons. Like there was a record that was released in 2019 about Oswald in Japan. There was nothing in that memo when it was released that contained anything we didn't already know. The reason it was not released was because the information had been collected by our listening station in Australia. And apparently we had promised the Australian government in the 60s that they let us put a listening station in Australia. We would never let the Australian people know that there was a CIA listening station on their soil. Well, this is going on while the number one show in Australia in the 2010s was Pine Gap, which is about our listening station in Australia.
Wow. Wow.
So, the first thing I'm going to be looking for when the document dump occurs is, are these just records in the collection, or are they records that were not in the collection that are now in the collection? Now, the National Archives has set up a new website, a new landing page. I don't know why they needed to do this, but they did it. I think it's part of the PR that they're doing. a new landing page where these records are supposedly going to be available tomorrow. Now, I don't know if what the plan was a mechanical plan about how are we going to release these records to the people, as opposed to reviewing the records. And
Hmm.
what I also told Warrington was that if there's going to be any redactions of these records, what we need is a public process like the ARB. We need to have a committee of researchers, people that the American people can trust, that these records, if they are postponed, genuinely pose a risk to national security. I mean, I can't imagine why something in 2025 is going to pose a risk to something that happened in the 1960s. I mean, if we're still using the same tactics, that's kind of embarrassing. But um, so we're going to see tomorrow, if there are any redactions, and if so, what they are.
Where do you look for analysis? Because if not yourself and some friends and colleagues at JFK Facts Substack, so that over the typically when things have been released, my memory is that okay, tomorrow is the day they're supposedly being released, but then I know within 2 or 3 days, every 2 or 3 days after that, for about 10 days or 2 or 3 weeks, there's an analysis. Who would you recommend as a source for folks to follow to see how the documents might be crunched and described?
Well, JFK Facts is setting up. We've already set up on Sunday. We set up. It just happened to be that we were getting ready for. We anticipated because the House was going to have a hearing tentatively scheduled for March 26th. We anticipated there would be a record dump right around that time for optical purposes. And we didn't realize it would be this week. So we started putting together, we have a computerized search engine that we've developed. So JFK Facts is going to be on top of that. The Mary Farrell Foundation is going to be on top of that, in terms of trying to do
Right.
uh, almost like an AI search, of these records.
Right.
Um, Education Forum will be obviously people discussing that. I'm sure Degenio's Kennedy's and King's page is going to have discussions. The problem I have to caution people is that a lot of researchers are very invested in their own personal theories. And they're going to be looking at these documents to sort of reinforce their own narrative and not necessarily look to see the bigger picture about what does this tell us. And so, there are people that think LBJ did it. There are people that believe the Zabruta film was altered. There are people, there's all different disputes. And people are going to be looking at these documents. There's the second Oswald. I mean, there's all kinds of sub theories, right? Um, so everyone's going to be looking at these documents, not simply from an objective, what does this tell me? But does this reinforce my particular theory? So
Okay.
people have to be careful when they listen to or read anyone's accounts to understand where they are coming from, because
Yeah.
that's probably going to influence the way. Now, we at JFK Facts, I mean, I'm co-chair, I'm the co-host of the podcast. And although Jeff and I have different views about you know the various levels of involvement of the government, and we still have an objective. We want to see where the facts lay,
Jeff
right?
Morley,
Right.
Jefferson Morley. Yeah.
Yeah, Jeff Morley, right. Like I'm a little bit, I kind of believe that the mafia paid for it, um, but they used the organizational skills of Jamwave and then the exiles that were trained to kill Castro. Whereas Jeff thinks that the planning is higher up on the food chain in the CIA.
Right.
So, um, but we're still stepping back, and where do these facts going to lead us?
Right. Larry, I hope you're so happy that you captured in this one awesome, episode such a thorough, review in history. How do you feel about the material you just shared?
Oh, I mean, this area is so complex, so complicated. It takes anyone probably a couple years to actually get conversant in this. And so I never feel like I can give it enough, uh, do it enough of a service to highlight it. But what I do want to say is that what we've learned, the reason the Kennedy assassination is important is because um, you know, like you mentioned, the Secret Service destroyed records in '94 and nothing happened to them, the individuals. Well, then we'd have January 6th and the Secret Service destroys emails and nothing happens to those people. And there was something happened in 1963 and the American people was lied to and the people got away with it. We had the Gulf of Tonkin incident, which is another lie to the American people. We have the Sandinistas in the mid '80s, where there was a lie about where that plan, what that plan was. We had the weapons of mass destruction that was ginned up, and as long as these people feel that they can make decisions, and the decisions, the papers, their memos are not given the light of day for the rest of the world and the American people to see, they are going to continue to make these decisions knowing that they hide behind secrecy. And so this is like when I was a kid. So the Kennedy assassination is to today's generation what World War I was to my generation. But World War I, for the most part, wasn't affecting the 1960s, right? Um, but what happened with the Kennedy assassination in terms of the way our government policy was altered, but second of all, the way the lies are able to be maintained, and we've got this huge ecosystem that reinforces the lies, and it goes with the media. Um, you know, I don't want to get too political, but you know, what we've learned from the initial Doge efforts is that there's a lot of stuff, a lot of hidden stuff in the government where money goes. And I'm not saying that the way they're handling what to do about that is right, but the fact that they've discovered this stuff using their computer systems, things are designed in the government to hide and mask things so people can't track them. And that's all because the bureaucrats don't want to be second guessed. I can tell you as a practicing environmental lawyer, I can see how documents are destroyed. In fact, something came out today. So this is about COVID, about how the scientists kind of hid the information about the leak in the lab. And this is David. This is in today's New York Times, a column. So this is a senior scientific advisor to Anthony Fauci, David Morans, who wrote um, um, to someone else, says that he had learned how to make emails disappear, especially emails about pandemic origins. Here's his quote: "We are all smart enough to know to never have smoking guns, and if we did, we wouldn't put them in emails, and if we found them, we delete them." That is a bureaucratic attitude that they don't want the American people to know what's going on. And it's important that Kennedy assassination is the ultimate transparency issue. If we can't get transparency on this, how are we going to get transparency on the rest of the government? It's critical that bureaucrats know that their decisions are going to be seen in the light of day. Judge Brandeis said in the 1920s that sunlight is the best disinfectant. And if we're going to regain control of our government, and if our government's going to be responsive to us, there needs to be greater sunlight shown so that the American people know what our bureaucrats are doing. And so the Kennedy assassination is just one piece of this greater problem. And so I encourage young people, this is not, again, a historical event. The things that happened with the Kennedy assassination, the cover up, the secrets, is continuing to operate today. And if we can get all these secrets exposed, then that may give caution to future bureaucrats that their decisions and their actions are going to be seen in the light of day at some point, and therefore they may be less arrogant and perhaps adhere to the law more carefully, because I have seen a lot of times where regulators decide to implement a law they would like to have been passed by Congress, but was not passed by Congress. They basically are advocates, and they basically make decisions based on their own personal positions about how they think things should be done in a particular area. And if a person in national security thinks there's no way the American people, this is like the Jack Nicholson line, you're not ready, you can't handle the truth, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So these people that are in national security are saying the American people can't handle this, so we're not going to let them see it. And yet, by us not seeing it, we don't know if they're actually making good decisions or who's influencing them. So um, I'll get off my soapbox now, but that's to me the bigger picture why my generation is going to start fading out. And it may be that, these records, there still may be records that are withheld and we're going to have to still fight the fight. But the next generation is going to have to pick up the mantle at some point. And I just want them to realize that this is not just historical. This is ongoing. It's influencing your government now. Your government's not functioning for you. And part of this is because people know that they can operate in the dark and never get caught.
Amen. I would only add to that the 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 horrible things that the government started doing after Kennedy was killed, justified by lies. It's uh, it has killed people. It has starved people. It has deprived people of peace and harmony and prosperity year after year. I bet at least you could find a number of such horrible crimes justified by official stories that are lies, a number of them every decade, maybe at least one a year. It's epic when one really digs into it. And the Kennedy assassination is the thread to pull, like you just said and described, that unravels so much about the truth we have to tell ourselves that we can handle about how corrupt and used and abused our government is in our name with our dollars, how far we are from being the America in all the songs that we love, the America that the founders tried to set up, the America that our children and our grandchildren deserve us to recreate and hand to them. I could go on my soapbox, Larry, but I'm just going to thank you so much for your decades of work in this field and your time tonight. We're really, really grateful. You were very, very generous, and you shared incredibly valuable insights that are going to inspire a lot of people.
Well, I hope so. And again, I don't, I would love to think that our work is going to be deemed, well, even if everything is released tomorrow, there's going to be a lot of hard research because there's going to be no smoking gun. There's not going to be a memo saying, here's how we're going to kill a president. This is a mosaic. The very reason the CIA withholds records is they don't want our adversaries to put together a mosaic, a puzzle piece, a crossword, what, not a crossword puzzle, the jigsaw puzzle. And by the same token, we're going to have to, when these records are released, historians and people that are trained are going to be able to take now these discrete little things that we find out. What did they look at? Where were they looking? Who were they talking to? And put together this picture that we haven't been able to see before. So it's going to take some time.
Indeed. All right, my friend.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Thank you, everybody, for watching and listening, and have a good night.